have you ever felt like you're just stuck? Like you're paying for mistakes that aren't even yours? It's a really heavy thought, this idea that our lives are somehow defined by the people who came before us. Well, believe it or not, the ancient book of Ezekiel tackles this head-on, and what it says is nothing short of revolutionary. It completely flips the script on this whole idea of a generational curse.
So let's just ask it directly. Are you paying for the mistakes of your ancestors? Is your destiny, are your struggles somehow locked in because of what your parents or grandparents did? This isn't just some modern therapy question. This was a desperate, painful cry that was echoing all through ancient Israel during one of their darkest times.
You see, this proverb from Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 2, was on everybody's lips back then. The people of Israel were in exile in Babylon, and they were trying to make sense of all their suffering. And this was their explanation. Hey, our fathers sinned, and now we're the ones paying the price. It was the ultimate blame game.
This is a fantastic way to think about it today. It perfectly captures that feeling of total injustice, right? My dad ate all the candy, but I'm the one who ends up with the cavities. It's a simple, powerful way of saying, look, this is not my fault.
And what they were really describing is this idea of a generational curse. The belief that God's punishment for a parent's sin just gets automatically passed down the bloodline. A debt that future generations are basically forced to pay, whether they like it or not. But God was about to step in and offer a stunning rebuttal to this entire way of thinking.
And here it is. In Ezekiel chapter 18, everything changes. God responds to their proverb with this incredibly emphatic divine oath. As I live, behold, the soul who sins is the one who will die. He just completely shatters their logic and introduces this radical, game-changing principle, personal responsibility.
So you've got these two totally opposing worldviews side by side. On one side, you have the people's proverb, this narrative of inherited guilt that just leads to, well, feeling hopeless. But on the other side, you have God's declaration of individual accountability, which gives everybody their agency back. God is drawing a line in the sand and saying, nope, the buck stops with you. And to make it absolutely crystal clear, God lays out this little three-generation scenario. He says, look, if a righteous father has a son who does evil, that son will be held accountable for his own choices. And get this, if a wicked father has a son who sees that wickedness and chooses to do what's right, that son will live. As it says in verse 17, the son will not die for the father's iniquity. Plain and simple.
Okay, but that's a fair question, right? Where did the people even get this idea? It didn't just come out of thin air. They were actually pointing to other parts of their own scriptures to justify their proverb. So let's take a look at the main source of all this confusion.
All right, so this verse from the Ten Commandments in Exodus is the one people always point to. But see, they were leaving out the most important part. Look at that key clause, of those who hate me. That changes everything. The consequence isn't some automatic inherited curse. It falls on the descendants who actively choose to continue in their family's pattern of rebellion against God. It's about a shared choice, not a shared sentence.
Now, this doesn't mean that our environment or our leaders have zero impact on us. Of course not. And Ezekiel gets into this complexity. The actions of a king, for example, could absolutely steer the entire nation toward God or, tragically, away from him. And, just look at this fascinating and tragic cycle. You've got the wicked grandfather, King Ahaz, who leads the whole nation into idolatry. Then his son Hezekiah comes along and brings about this massive, incredible revival. But then just one generation later, his son Manasseh plunges the nation into even worse evil than his grandfather ever did. So yeah, the influence of a leader is undeniably powerful. But here's the critical distinction we have to make. Influence is not the same thing as inherited guilt. The people weren't punished for what Manasseh did. Their judgment came because of the evil that he led them into, evil they chose to follow. They weren't passive victims. They were active participants.
So then God kind of zooms the camera out. He reviews their entire national history, and he points out that this wasn't just a one-time failure by a single generation. No, it was a consistent, multi-generational pattern of choosing rebellion.
Look at the track record. From the very beginning in Egypt, through 2 whole generations wandering in the wilderness, and then right into the Promised Land itself, the story is tragically the same. Each and every generation had the chance to turn to God, but each one, by and large, chose to follow the same rebellious path as their fathers. This wasn't a curse they couldn't escape, it was a choice, and they kept making it over and over again. God's summary of all this in Ezekiel chapter 20 is, well, it's blunt. He says, "But they rebelled against me and were not willing to listen to me." The core issue wasn't their ancestry. It was their own heart, their own unwillingness to listen and obey right now.
So this raises a big question, doesn't it? If they were rebelling for so long, why did God tolerate it? Why did he wait? Well, the answer we find in Ezekiel 20. It shifts our whole perspective and reveals something really profound about God's ultimate motivation.
This is such a huge point. God's patience wasn't just for Israel's benefit, it was for the sake of his own name, his own reputation. He knew that if he had destroyed them out in the wilderness, the other nations would have looked on and said, "See, their God was too weak to keep his promises." So he held back to protect his own honor. But that patience, it was about to run out.
And when that judgment finally came, Ezekiel uses these absolutely terrifying metaphors to describe it. He calls it a forest fire that burns everything, the green living trees and the dry dead ones. He calls it a sharpened, polished sword, Babylon, that cuts down everyone in its path. This was a national judgment, and it was going to be impartial and all-encompassing.
Just think about what this meant. They were about to lose everything that defined them as a people. Their king from David's line, gone. Their nation, their land, exiled. Their temple, the very place God dwelt among them, destroyed. Every single external pillar of their identity was about to be stripped away, forcing a crisis that was deeply, deeply personal.
And this brings us all the way back to the incredible freedom at the very heart of Ezekiel's message. Because after God strips away all the excuses, all the blame shifting, all the external identities, what are you left with? You're left with yourself, and an absolutely astounding promise from God.
This right here, this is the great unburdening we find in Ezekiel 18. God's judgment isn't anchored to your past. It's anchored to your response to Him right here, right now. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've come from. A genuine turn of the heart, a real repentance, changes everything.
So, here it is, the powerful, liberating takeaway from all of this. The blame game is over. The story about being a helpless victim of your history, that's shattered. Your past doesn't define you. Your parents don't define you. Your leaders don't define you.
Ultimately, the entire message of Ezekiel lands right here, with this one question. If you are not defined by the past, then your identity is being forged in this present moment. It all comes down to your choice, your response to God. So, what's it going to be?